Hello, Tim, and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. It's a Ukraine War Frontline update for the 30th of June 2023. Before we go to the frontline, let's have a couple of little delves into what Zaluzhny has said in a recent interview. He's in charge of the Ukrainian forces, of course. It is annoying when they say that the offensive is slow because every meter is given with blood. This is not a show that is watched by the whole world on which bets are placed or something like that. Every day, every meter is given blood. So that is very true. He's also said that no one says we should get 120 planes tomorrow. I don't need that much. A limited amount isn't enough, but they are needed. There is no other way. The enemy is using a different generation of aviation. It's as if we now went on the offensive with bows and arrows. So these considerations that need to be understood in terms of the counter-offensive, the Ukrainian counter-offensive, it is yes, it is slow and grinding, but that's about managing expectations, and every meter is incredibly uh, expensively fought over. He emphasized, for example, he's emphasized that for the Ukrainian counteroffensive to advance faster, he needs more jets. So that is the second part. Close air support they don't have. So imagine NATO trying to do an equivalent counteroffensive, but with no air support. It's massively, massively difficult. And then you throw in the minefields and defensive lines on top of that. The hope is that once those defensive lines are broken, that getting behind those lines then becomes much easier, that they will be able to advance far more quickly without having to negotiate minefields en masse. Right, let's go to the northeast sector. That looks on the war map, a map like this, the Kupiansk to Svatva to Kreminna. You can see the defensive lines all the way down there. They're nowhere near that. They've not really been doing any offensive work around the Luhansk area. There were claims that I shared with you earlier concerning Luhansk, of course. And that claim is here. Tim White saying that Ukraine's army reports a battle in Luhansk region that lasted for 18 hours. National Guardsmen established themselves in, quote, new positions, repelling Russia's attacks. Over 40 invaders were killed, 100 plus wounded in the clashes. A slap from Big 50 Regiment is written on that shell. So that's what he says, but that is unverified. I don't know where that's taken place. Take that with a pinch, a block of salt. Okay, so that's the Luhansk region. This is the Luhansk Oblast here. Kupiansk to Svatva. Actually, Svatva then, Kupiansk, sorry, is in Kharkiv. You can see the border coming down here. Luhansk contains Svatva and Kreminna. Onto the ISW, Institute for the Study of War, that says a Kremlin-affiliated mill blogger claimed that Russian forces made unspecified gains near the Serebryantski forest, and that Russian forces stopped a Ukrainian assault near the forest area, and that Russian special forces destroyed a Ukrainian sabotage and reconnaissance group near the forest. Those are kind of fairly unsubstantiated and vague claims, but you can see that the activity is mainly taking place in that forest area to the south of Kreminna there. But no other details about areas otherwise, just limited ground attacks near Kreminna. It goes on to talk about Dalivka, which is much further to the south near Bakhmut. Just to remind you, as we come down south past Bilohorivka and Spirna, that these lines represent the Russian defensive lines, and the blue line is a pro-Ukrainian mapper, Andrew Perpetua. Red line is a pro-Russian mapper, Syriac map. So you can see the differences between the two. Syriac maps hasn't updated really particularly a lot in the last 48 hours, really, and nothing for the last 24 hours at all. Deep State map, the pro-Ukrainian mapper in the Bakhmut area, is signified by the yellow line. That is the Russian defensive line. Now, they have changed their maps, but they are under a 48 to 72 hour delay. They have shown a movement in this area, sort of south of Zalizhnansky by the M03 or E40 highway, main supply route coming into the north of Bakhmut. They've also signified that the Ukrainians have been pushed back a good deal by Bakhivka. But there was talk yesterday that Ukrainians are potentially going to take Bakhivka, and there's almost certainly fighting going on in that settlement today now. So I think that movement represents possibly the counterattack that the Russians did previously, and that is your operational security delay, and actually it's more likely to be in line with what the other two mappers have in that area. As we come further to the south, just to talk through the mappers before we look at other sources and details, Deep State Map has some advances for the Ukrainians noted in the Russian lines moving back in this area to the west of Klishchivka, but of course that's still, a good deal back from Andrew Perpetua. Syriac maps and Deep State Map, I think, are out of date to some degree. There is fighting possibly in Klishchivka, certainly on the outskirts as we speak. So I think that, yeah, those mappers are a little bit behind the times. Okay, let's go and look at some of the. I guess we'll go to ISW first to look at what they have to say. Malia reported yesterday that Ukrainians had advanced 1,200 meters around Klishchivka and 1,500 meters around Kurdyivka. So I did report that. I think that's still the yesterday claims. 1,500 meters. I mean, I'd be really interested to know where that is around Kurdyivka. There is this dam area where they have gained some territory, but I don't, if they've advanced at all from these positions, then they are in Kurdyivka, unless they have, I don't know, area north of Kurdyivka and east of the canal. And 1,500 meters would be about that. So they might have some areas around Kurdyivka rather than actually in Kurdyivka as it would be now. Right. So to continue, Malia added that Russian forces in the area are conducting counterattacks but have retreated in some areas and are after suffering losses. Ukrainian commander Yaroslavsky stated that Ukrainian forces are in the process of liberating Klishchivka. So in the process of liberating Klishchivka would indicate that actually they're a damn sight closer than these two mappers, Deep State Map and Syriac Maps, would admit. But of course, the yellow line refers, that's really about operational security. That's why they are further back. To continue, he stated that Ukrainian forces pushed Russian forces out of positions on the western outskirts of Bakhmut, and fighting is ongoing near Bakhivka. Yaroslavsky added that the liberation of dominant elevated positions in Bakhivka and Klishchivka will allow Ukrainian forces to operationally encircle Russian forces in Bakhmut. A Russian mill blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces advanced along the highway near Zalizhnyansky and that Russian forces repelled several Ukrainian mechanized assaults near Kurdyivka. So that's interesting, and that there are mechanized assaults going on in Kurdyivka, the use of IFVs probably to support the troops there. There's a talk about Yakovlivka as well, because this is a little bit of an important place in terms of being on higher ground, and that will allow some advantage for the Ukrainians there in sort of line of sight to other places and getting extra range on their artillery if they can place them in the area or on the mortars and whatnot. But yeah, Yakovlivka taking that would, as I said yesterday, would start to allow a more successful encirclement of Bakhmut. Of course, much closer to Bakhmut itself, Bakhivka, Yahidny would also allow that. And they're reporting from Ukraine's video was talking about sort of cutting off this salient here with activity, both north and south of that salient. So if we go and look at what some of these sources say, because I think we're pretty much finished there, other than Cherevati, the spokesperson for the Ukrainians, has reported that the Russians have transferred an unspecified Russian Airborne Forces VDV regiment from the Kreminna area to the Bakhmut direction to reinforce Russian forces in the area. Now, going back to what I've done a lot of talking about, which is what Bakhmut, the objective was there previously for the Ukrainians, was to fix and attrit the Russian troops. Well, if they are forcing the Russians to bring in reserves from Kreminna, then the advances that the Russians have been making in Kreminna, or the successes they had, albeit limited, will be even harder to achieve. They just won't, they don't have enough forces to defend the entire front line, especially when they want to really, really keep hold of someone like Bakhmut after such a difficult time taking it. So 9 months plus of attritional warfare to take Bakhmut at a huge cost in terms of personnel to the Russians, that PR win would reverse to be an absolute PR disaster if they lost it easily. So throwing in reserves there is pretty predictably what they would do, but at the expense of other places along the line. Now, War Mapper here has a Bakhmut map to show that the Ukrainians really are making some significant advances around the Klishchivka area, and even the Bakhmut area itself as well down in Kupiansk. Although this is kind of really summarizing the advances they have made, I guess, in the last week. But there, it could well be that the Ukrainians are making some inroads in Bakhmut as well. Just to give you some footage, this is trench clearing to the south of Bakhmut along the channel. So they say, turn the music off. Just to let you know, I do know that you can mute tabs. I just like to get angry every day. And so when the music comes on, it just gives me an excuse to rage. So this is activity in the Bakhmut area. You can see, they are using combined arms here. I don't want to go into trench warfare just in case it's anything inappropriate, but there was evidence in this piece of mine clearing, but I think that's more at the beginning. You can see the channels, they're coming down, all coming along the same tracks so that they minimize the chance of hitting mines. I talked about cluster munitions being a potential way of clearing minefields, and since there are so many cluster munitions, that could be a useful way, but actually struggling to find any clear evidence of that having been done in the past. I suppose conceptually it might work, is whether cluster munitions would have enough power to trigger pressure mines and so on. Right, the reporting from Ukraine video that gets serialized, or gets the transcription of it gets posted to Euromaidan Press every day. So if you don't want to watch a video, they always have the write up of that, talking about clearing these places, the trench warfare that's taking place, the tactics for the trench warfare in and around the Bakhmut area, all talked about there, and the taking out of a Russian fighter jet in the Bakhmut area too, sort of giving details of that. And again, talking about the important settlement of Yakovlivka, as I've just been mentioning there. So, worth having a little read if you don't want to watch the reporting from Ukraine video. Of course, they generally talk about the successes of the Ukrainians. So, take their claims as coming from a pro-Ukrainian source. It's not to say it's not accurate, but always bear that in mind. Right, so that's Bakhmut. I think things are going fairly well in Bakhmut, and as I've said before, they're doing that all without dipping into their counter-offensive pot. So this is without the new equipment, I would say, in the main, without the troops that have been trained by NATO. These are using existing forces from the area, and still they are able to take a huge amount of land compared to what the Russians took over a comparable period. So a month worth of activity almost. And if we go and look at where the lines were on the 30th, 30th of May, as according to Deep State map. So this is a white line that you'll now see, and you should see. So if you compare that, obviously Deep State is behind the times all around at the moment. They're about 3 days behind, but there's still areas of gain that they've made here. I would actually, by Kupiansk, and then I don't continue the Deep State line. But if you're going to compare it to probably the more accurate Andrew Perpetua map as to what is going on along the front line, then actually the difference between the blue and the white. So let's get rid of Syriac maps and then see and get rid of some of these along here. And you'll get a sense that actually there's quite a big movement there over the past month. And if that is an accurate representation of the activity that's taken place, of the gains that the Ukrainians have made, then that is really significant for 1 month. Think about how difficult it was for the Russians to take this area and how slowly they took it. The Ukrainians are certainly doing a better job there at the moment. Right, so I'm going to get all those lines back for your delectation. And get rid of the white one for now. Right, let's move south of Bakhmut and come down to Adiivka. There's some slight gains, as according to Andrew Perpetua's mapping, in this area of Vesely. So this is Vesely. It's not marked on the map, but that is the town of Vesely, where the Ukrainians have made some gains. And Andrew Perpetua has clocked up some further gains for them. I don't know if that's just confirmation of what took place previously, just better confirmation, or whether they've made extra gains. It's sometimes difficult to know. But that's the only change to the mapping really in the Avdiivka area. Let's go and look at what the ISW has to say. And the answer is actually not a lot. I don't even have a tab for Avdiivka this time round. So they mention Siverny, Novomykhailivka, Avdiivka, Marinka. So actually, not a lot to report in Marinka. Just repelled attacks in Siverny, which is just north of Vodyanye there. That holding out enables the Ukrainians to stop Avdiivka being encircled. That's the importance of Siverny, and as well Stepova up there. But actually, they forced the Russians back to Krasnohorivka area subsequently. But anyway, there is activity in Marinka and Novomykhailivka. The Russians are still pushing, I think, in the area south of Marinka, between Marinka and Novomykhailivka, where we saw that they've got this place here, which is a fortified area, Khevinets, I think, or Khevinets. That is there, and that's around this area that they use. There's another sort of fortification, I think, probably there. They used the VBIED, the vehicle-borne explosive device, improvised explosive device. So, in other words, they packed a vehicle full of explosives and sent it to the Ukrainian lines, and that's activity that's been taking place around there, and they're having some success there, and they're still pressuring in that area. If we go to Donetsk as a whole, let's look at Poulet-Volon's map of Donetsk, and it shows that the Ukrainians are actually pushing right in the corner, actually to the to the east of Vuhledar here, around Solodka area, where they did have some success here maybe a month or two ago, 6 weeks ago. The Ukrainians took some land back there. Well, he's indicating that Ukrainians are pressuring there. I haven't heard anything about Vuhledar itself for a good couple of days. And then as we go to the west from there, I think that we'll have it. No, that's the Bakhmut map. Poulet-Volon here showing Velika Novosilka. So as go on my map first of all, give you a sense of where we are. Just to the west of Vuhledar, we have Velika Novosilka, and the activity taking place around Staromayorska and Urozhainy. They appear to be fighting on the outskirts of Urozhainy, just up here, and advancing towards Pryutne. But it is going to be slow going. You've got minefields, you've got fortifications, trench works, and so on and so forth. Here you can see the pressure that Ukrainians are putting on the Russians everywhere. They are trying to counterattack in several of these places, the Russians. They are making it difficult, but as I've said before, at what expense? They're drafting in their reserves, they're attriting their forces, rather than soaking up the Ukrainian attacks in their the larger trench lines. They're actively defending each and every one of these towns and villages. You can see here from Andrew Perpetua's map that, yeah, there's lots of activity around that salient. We'll see what No Reports has to say. So, of this area, Ukrainian units have progressed south of Rivnepil, forcing Russians to set up new defense points behind the forest ridge. So on my map, if we look at Rivnepil there, they liberated Rivnepil, and they are moving to the south, and the Russians are taking up defensive lines in these sort of areas. It is high ground here, so the Ukrainians are going to be sort of fighting uphill until they get control of this high ground, and that should give them an advantage to taking some of these settlements down the river valley that comes down here. Okay, back to No Reports. He says that Staromayorsk is being approached from the west and soon attacked from two flanks. The Russians pulled reserves to Pryutne. So if we zoom in on here, you can see that he has the Ukrainians taking control of more land south of Rivnepil, and that they're putting pressure on Stepova from the north, Pryutna from the north, and no doubt from the west as well, and then Staromilsk and Uruzhany. So much of the same as to what has been happening. It is definitely difficult fighting. I'm going to go to Kenneth Gregg a little later to give you an update of all the areas, but I'll just cover cover these individually for the time being. This is no reports again in the Vasilivka axis. So this is to the west again from here. They are, and just to let you know, the ISW confirms that they are making progress in these areas. So Malia, the Deputy Defense Minister, said yesterday at 1,300 meters in the Rivnepil Volodny, so that's a Velika Novosilka direction. A Russian mill blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces entrenched themselves in new positions near Pryutne, and another mill blogger claimed that Russian forces repelled Ukrainian attacks there. So there's a lot of activity in that area, as you can imagine. And then as you come west, some Russian mill bloggers claim that Russian forces repelled Ukrainian attacks near Robotyne, while others claimed that Ukrainian forces advanced on the northern outskirts of Robotyne. Okay, let's go and look at this on Knoll Reports map. So Robotyne is here. You can see it's south of Orikhiv, the larger town of Orikhiv. You've got Kopane and Verbove as settlements nearby. And this kind of salient for the Ukrainians is quite wide, 10 kilometers. So the Ukrainian units have advanced north of Robotyne over a stretch of 10 kilometers wide. Between the entrance of Robotyne and the Ukrainian forces, there is only one field remaining. There are initial reports that fighting has already started. East of Robotyne, things are happening, winky face. Now, that's his cryptic way of saying, probably good news or there is news to report east of there. Two things to say. I'm not sure exactly where that would be, east of Robotyne. Whether that's immediately east towards Verbova or whether there's activity. There was activity yesterday around Luhivska. And I know that, Myrna as well at Marfapil Drozhnianka, they're supposedly activity, but we haven't heard anything about them really. So it could mean any of those places. But also, he sometimes says these things, no reports, but then you don't hear anything about it subsequently. So you wonder whether, these things definitely do happen. But I imagine they are on a counteroffensive. There will be activities like that taking place. And then you've got Pyatikhatki and Lobkove, not too much to report from there. No reports then refers to Romanov, the Russian channel, that says that he claims that they are anxious. Quote, the line of contact now walks along the white line. The northern edge of Robotyne and the enemy are separated by one field only. So that's his idea of where the advance has got up to, just one field away from the entrance to Robotyne. Depends where you classify the entrance, but it might just be that the Ukrainians really are knocking on the door in this kind of general area there. So there, I assume there'll be lots of activity there over the next 24, 48 hours or so. Then we go on to activity that is taking place in Kherson finally. So this is the Antonivsky Bridge area that traverses the Dnipro River, just to the northeast of Kherson. The delta seems to be a bit of a grey zone, although Syriac Maps, a pro-Russian mapper, has a lot of it under the control of the Russians. I'm not sure that is the case. There's fierce fighting over this Antonivsky Bridge area, where the Ukrainians have got a foothold on the southern shore, or the eastern bank, the left bank of the Dnipro here. And they are doing a lot of hiding under the bridge, as in when they need cover, they can get under the bridge and use that as cover to protect themselves from mortar or artillery attacks. Well, I think short of it appears that the Ukrainians might have S-300s working in the area. So the Russians have been wanting aviation to support their forces, but the aviation doesn't seem to have, supported them and answered their requests. As a result, the Russians have fired an Iskander missile at the bridge, and we'll see that in a second. So Russian Channel 2 majors regarding the Antonivsky Bridge situation. The Russian forces failed to clear the area and took losses, including equipment due to remote mining. The bridgehead is still intact. But then just recently, like just now, first of all, Strelkov Evil Gherkin has said the good news is that the southern tip of the Antonovsky Bridge opposite Kherson was smashed with an accurate strike by an Iskander, under which the Ukrainians parachuted from western coast were hiding. So those that had dropped in from the other side of the river and were using that as they were using that bridge as a hiding place. Now the bridgehead in this area can be successfully eliminated, and subsequently this footage has come out. So this is the Iskander striking the Antonovsky Bridge. As you can see, that is a significant explosion, and there could be quite a serious loss of Ukrainian troops there, possibly. I don't know, but that's not going to help their counterattack in that area. But it goes to show that the Russians were getting a little desperate. There's a lot of electronic warfare jamming taking place, so that will affect their comms and affect their precision munitions, so on and so forth, and drones. And the Russians have been talking on Telegram to try and get aviation, but their air defenses are stopping that. So Iskander is perhaps the best option for taking out those troops there. So that is what's happened along the front line. I'm just going to give you a rundown of what Kenneth Gregg, the Finnish fighter, has been saying. Always take what he says with a pinch of salt. I mean, he is pro-Ukrainian, and I think sometimes does get a lot of his information from the same places I get, rather than having those sources on the ground, although other times he does clearly have sources on the ground. So he says, let's start with the front line. Sloboda front, no activity by us or the Russians. Seversky Donetsk, averted Russian attacks at Bedorivka and Roslivka. Bakhmut area, 28th Mechanized Brigade, armor and heavy equipment has advanced to Kurdyivka and raised the blue and yellow banner on the waterworks from the west of the town. Yep, I already reported that yesterday. We've started to drive away the Russians from the heights west of the city, which means that they have started to get Russians elite soldiers as POWs. In practice, the city is ours and there is no way out for them. Kherson, we have reinforced a small beachhead west of Oleshki, partly as this is no-go zone for the Russian flights. We have anti-aircraft systems on our side of the river that effectively close off the airspace. In the beginning, we came with small groups, but now we have a couple of hundred men there. Right now, they act as a service hub for our guerrillas and the local resistance movements. Interesting. So that may be a little bit more difficult with the use of that Iskander missile, though. Zaporizhia, we are slowly but surely approaching Zerebianki. So that, to remind you, is just south of Piatikhatki. Here we go to the edge of the Zaporizhia reservoir. We've got Logkova, Piatikhatki, and Zerebianki there. So that's what he's talking about. And he says, where were we? We took over the ridges around the community, but the Russians are counterattacking intensely. So right now there's fierce fighting going on. Those who control the ridges also control the community. Around Robotina and Novoprokopivka, we are clearing the Russians' trenches, and so it's man-to-man fighting. This means that we are advancing slowly but surely here. South of Rivnepil, that's in the Velika Novosilka area, we approach Bryutne quickly. We have occupied the ridge outside the village. The Russians were forced to abandon them, so it won't be long before we have liberated the community. We're currently conducting a flank attack against Staromayorska, which the Russians did not expect. It is preparatory work by our guerrillas troops that made this possible. So just to give you an idea of where all that is, this is going back over. I know I've already gone over this, but just gives you another source. So this is attacking to the west of Staromayorska, coming into the west as well as from the north. And potentially from three sides, as Urozhainy is enclosed as well, or the Ukrainians move on there, and fighting around Pryutne too. So he continues that. Generally speaking, many people think the offensive has failed, but I think it is going well. So he's kind of answering critics. Yes, this is part of the Russian narrative, but there are many pro-Ukrainians who have been surprised at how slowly this is going and thinking it's kind of not going to plan and may not be going to exact plan or to the best expectations one might have had, but were they realistic enough? And there are many that have said actually it was always going to be much more difficult than waltzing through these minefields. So despite the fact that we do not have air superiority and despite the huge minefields planted by the Russians, we are getting closer to the main defense line every day. Our problem is the Russian helicopters. They fire their rockets from a distance of 8 kilometers towards us. Someone is asking why we aren't using things like Stormer that will have Starstreak and slightly greater range, but it's still about the radars on board. So if the radars aren't picking up really low helicopters, then those helicopters can get really close and fire and be within obviously range of firing at mechanized equipment, but then manpads still won't be able to hit them because manpads have a 5 kilometer range tops, and these ATGMs on board the helicopters will have an 8 kilometer range. As he says here, they fire their rockets from a distance of 8 kilometers towards us. Our manpads do not reach them, and they fly too low for our air defense where they are now. Most likely we will move them closer. That's air defense. NATO doctrine emphasizes to use air force, so send us a squadron F-16s and Gripen with pilots, and we'll be done within 2 weeks. So on and so forth. So that's what he's saying there, and taking out a lot of artillery. Now, one thing I will say that as I was just bringing up Kenneth Gregg's stuff here, I came across this article that's just come out, and I said that around Bakhmut, for example, they are not using any of the new equipment that has been sort of ring fenced for the counteroffensive. But here, this article in Ford says Ukraine's CV-90 fighting vehicles have guns like chainsaws, and they just reached the woods of eastern Ukraine. So this is just out saying that Ukraine's Swedish-made CV-90s, which are supposedly very good fighting vehicles, have arrived on a front line, apparently somewhere around Bakhmut in eastern Ukraine's Donbass region. The deployment makes sense, while southern Ukraine's Zaporizhia Oblast is the locus of the Ukrainian Armed Forces' 3-week-old counteroffensive. Kyiv's troops are also counterattacking north and south of the ruins of Bakhmut, which Russian forces captured back in May after months of human wave assaults, costing thousands of lives. They significantly boost Ukrainian firepower in the Bakhmut sector, these CV-90s. They could help the Ukrainians to break through Russian fortifications and also help them to exploit any breakthroughs. The tracked 3-crew CV-90 built by Swedish firms Haglunds and Bofors weighs 37 tons. The standard version carries up to 6 infantry and packs an autocannon in an armoured turret. The CV-90 is popular in Northern Europe, and it's not hard to see why. Its designers optimised the vehicle for operations in Scandinavian forests. It just so happens that eastern Ukraine also has lots of trees, many of them on commercial plantations. Sweden back in January pledged 50 of these. We don't know which brigade operates them or even which service, the Army, the Marines, or the separate air assault forces, but knew all along that the ex-Swedish fighting vehicles would join the counteroffensive. We will be at the centre of it, one Ukrainian CV-90 trainee said in early June. So that's interesting to see these being used. They might well be near Bakhmut, and that could change how things take place around Bakhmut in the east. So machine guns like chainsaws. So that's obviously really bigging up their capabilities there, and trying to be, I guess, as positive as possible. But they're certainly going to be really useful in the Bakhmut area. Anyway, thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. Take care of yourselves, and I'll speak to you in the extra video later.